I want to thank you for joining us tonight for tonight's Speaker Series program, Making Play Safer for Kids. I'm getting older. I'm going to use my reading glasses here a little bit. Also want to welcome everybody who's participating in the live webcast. The Foundation trustees, our family members, we created the Speaker Series to spur action around critical issues that we're very passionate about. And I would say for me and for my family and probably most everybody in this room, improving the lives of young people is probably the most critical issue that we all care deeply about. As it relates to tonight's discussion, the passion is about the health of our future generations by keeping them safe and fighting childhood obesity. As everybody knows, child obesity has more than doubled in children and tripled in adolescents in the past 30 years. The causes are numerous, but basically rolled up into two key areas. One is an absence of healthy eating, and two is a lack of physical activity. No surprises. So when you think about the last 30 years in terms of what's been happening to us in our society, it's no coincidence that during that period of time, the availability of quick processed foods and beverages increased dramatically. Increase in dual income families reduced the opportunities to eat meals together as a family. Budget-strapped schools cut back on time for recesses and physical education programs. The increasing affordability of technology, putting more televisions in more bedrooms, not to mention cell phones, internet, video games, and social media, all of which takes us away from face-to-face activity and from being outdoors together. Finally, increasing concerns regarding injuries relating to physical activity and lowering kids' participation, not just in sports, but in other areas of play as well. So that is the reason for the topic tonight. Focus on the many benefits of play and how to expand opportunities for safe participation. In addition to reducing childhood obesity, research proves that kids who are more active in play of any kind tend to be healthier and stronger leaders who perform better in school, and a multitude of other studies prove benefits of physical activity in a variety of ways in terms of psychological well-being and reducing the threat of chronic diseases as they approach their adulthoods. And our jobs as parents and youth-supporting organizations, schools, coaches, doctors, is to provide the right environment for all kids to engage in physical activity and to encourage kids to participate in physical activities and to reduce and eliminate the risks associated, such as head injuries, exertion injuries, and lack of fluids. Georgia leaders have taken an important step in that direction in this regard. Our legislators have passed Return to Play Act last year, requires schools and recreation leagues to educate parents on the nature and the risk of concussions and protocols for return to play. Two of our legislators, I believe, are here tonight, Representatives Jimmy Pruitt and Margaret Kieser. Are you both here tonight? If so, can you stand up and recognize you? Maybe you're not here. You're here in spirit, I know that. So the governor was here earlier tonight, had a chance to visit with the commissioner and myself. And I also want to thank the NFL staff. We have worked together to complete this important piece of work. Our team, your franchise, is doing its part as well. We're partnering with the NFL and the Family Foundation to support USA's football Heads Up for Football program. And together, we're helping thousands of Georgia youth, players, coaches, parents learn about safe tackling techniques and proper equipment fitting. And I would encourage you to visit our Falcons website and sign up for Heads Up Football Clinic coming to your community in the next several months. We have 5 clinics for kids, 2 for moms. More to come, so just look at the website and we'll continue to add those clinics. Tonight's program will further enlighten all of us on the new and innovative solutions for expanding safe play participation across all sports and all physical activities for all children. And we're honored tonight to have 4 topic experts: Dr. David Satcher, former U.S. Surgeon General, now Chair of the National Council on Youth Sports Safety; Kate Carr, President and CEO of Safe Kids Worldwide; Alexis Glick, CEO of Gen Youth Foundation, partner of the NFL's Play 60 program. And finally, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay is the CNN chief medical correspondent and the associate chief of neurosurgery at Grady Hospital. Sanjay has been a great partner to our foundation for many years, and we appreciate you being here tonight, and he'll lead the conversations tonight. Full bios and all of our panel members are included in your program. We're also honored to have tonight a very good friend and a great leader in health and safety, and that's the NFL Commissioner, Roger Goodell. The NFL has a long history of safety-first approach to professional football, and was made even stronger by Roger's leadership. During his tenure as commissioner, Roger has aggressively built on ongoing efforts to fund scientific research, develop better equipment, educate players and coaches, and help evaluate and change the playing rules, all in the name of safety of our game. He also, with a father of twins, young ladies, is an advocate for safety in all sports. As the most popular sport in America, Roger understands the responsibility of the NFL to lead in this area, to influence college and high school and youth football, to prevent and encourage not only healthy play in our game, but in other sports, because safety and the health of our kids is really paramount. To do so is not just bad for the business of sports, but far and away, it's worse for America. It's worse for our young people. I want to thank Roger for being here tonight, along with Paul Hicks, Executive Vice President, Communications and Public Affairs, Jeff Miller sitting up here with Roger, Senior Vice President, Health and Safety, and Pete Abitante. I didn't see Pete. Is Pete here tonight? Pete's not here tonight, okay? In that case, thank you, Pete, wherever you are anyway. So I'm going to ask the Commissioner to spend a few minutes talking to you about some of his perspective, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Gupta for leading our panel discussion. Thank you all for being here tonight, and look forward to comments and participation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Arthur. It's a privilege to be here tonight and to be able to listen to the dialogue and hopefully participate a little bit from time to time. I'd like to just take a moment to salute Arthur and the foundation, his family foundation, and the Falcons for leadership they're providing, not just tonight to create this kind of a forum. This is the right discussion to be having. As communities, we need to be having this discussion. And tonight, I think you'll hear a lot, we'll learn a lot, and we'll be better for it. And Arthur has demonstrated that throughout his career, but as a owner of the NFL and an important asset here in this community with the Falcons, he's done it not just in the Atlanta area, but he's a great leader for the NFL. And he makes the NFL better by being part of it. And we depend a lot on our owners. Our decisions are made on the basis of 24 to 32 owners voting in favor of a particular issue. And Arthur leads many of those committees. He has pushed his organization on many fronts, but particularly in this area where he has become the gold standard as it relates to youth football safety. Our Heads Up program is being implemented here in this community at an aggressive rate, and all because of the leadership of Arthur. And so, Arthur, thank you for the leadership you're providing to this community. So. I know we want to get to the panel, but let me just make a couple of quick points that are important to me. As Arthur mentioned, I am the father of twin daughters who are 12 years old, very active in lacrosse and soccer and other sports. And sports are a big part of, I think, America. It's a big part of what I'm all about. I played 3 sports myself, and I believe in it. I believe the values that we get from sports, the competitiveness, the discipline, the hard work, understanding perseverance, understanding about ourselves, what we're all about, being able to get up when you're knocked down. And probably most importantly, teamwork. Teamwork is critical in life, and life is a team sport. And I want my kids to participate. I want them to be safe. And when we send them off to play sports, I care who's supervising them. I care how they're playing the game. And I think all of us who are parents realize the importance of that. We don't leave our children at home at night with someone that we don't know is supervising our children properly, we shouldn't leave them on the playing field or the courts. And that's what we're all about. The NFL is proudly taking a leadership position on bringing awareness to safety and the importance of safety in sports. And you don't have to compromise safety to do it well. We believe in the NFL that we're a safer and better sport because of the steps we've taken to make our game safer. But the impact really is not so much in the NFL as it is in all of the other levels below it, whether it's college, high school, or youth sports. And that's the role we really are privileged to take, and we are proud of the role we're taking in that one. And I think one of the things that we hear an awful lot about are the decline in participation in youth sports. And it concerns me as a parent and as someone that believes that sports are part of the fabric of America. And there are probably many reasons for that. Safety may be one of them, and I'm assuming we'll have a discussion on it. A specialization is another one. I played 3 sports. In my community, it is hard to see any kid who's playing 3 sports anymore. And that is a challenge in and of itself and may not be part of the dialogue tonight. But that specialization puts a lot of stress on children in many cases. And it's another part of the discussion that probably we need to have at some stage. But I look forward to having the discussion tonight because I think this issue is critical for our children, is critical for our country, and I believe that we can address this, and sports are safer, they are better, and they are more critical than ever. So I'll leave it to you, Sanjay, to take it over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, we're going to get started, and there is a live webcast as well, so people are going to be watching that, and there's a Twitter handle as well, Play Safe, so feel free to tweet whether you're watching on the web or here at home. Arthur Blank, thank you so much for having me as a community member. These types of discussions are the types of discussions that we should be having. We talk a lot about the problems, maybe too much, the media included, but it's time to talk about some solutions, so I appreciate that. Commissioner, thank you as well. I have 3 daughters. So I share some of the same sentiments you do, both personally and professionally. So thank you very much. Let's get started. Very important topic. Dr. Satcher, let me start with you. You've traveled around the country talking about safety in sports, specifically to youth. And I'm curious, you get asked a lot as America's doctor. They look at you and they see America's doctor. Should I let my kids play sports? How do you answer that question? What goes through your head when trying to answer that? I know you've been asked before.
I have, but it's still a very important question. And as you said, we had the opportunity to travel around the country and meet with former players and their spouses over a 3-year period, talking about their experiences in playing football, but also since leaving football. And we also interacted with communities. We call them the community huddles. And a very frequent question from parents was the question, should I allow my kids to play sports? It's not an easy question, and I think the first thing we have to admit is what the Institute of Medicine said recently in its report, and that is the science that relates to the incidence of concussions, for example, the science that relates to diagnosis, treatment, and prevention is still developing. We don't have the science, and that's why we have the National Council on Youth Sports Safety, and most of them are here tonight. We met all day today, and it's a great group. But let me say, first off, I would make it clear that it's a decision that parents have to make themselves. But there are 2 things that I think we have to consider, and I think we've heard them both from Mr. Blank and Commissioner Goodell. First, the benefits of playing sports. It's something that every parent should know. The fun, the enjoyment, the building of self-confidence, the teamwork, learning leadership. Those are all things that children benefit tremendously from, and I think we as a society benefit tremendously from them. But because of what we know about the potential risk to for concussions and brain injury generally and other injuries, I think we also have to talk with them about the fact that every state now and the District of Columbia has policies about return to play and things like that. And if I were a parent of a child wanting to play sports, I would want to know what my state says about that. I would want to know what kind of training the coach has, because I really think it makes a difference how much the coach knows about dealing with injuries as well as preventing them. I would want to know the culture, because I think culture is important. The Institute of Medicine said that. We struggle with a culture that says, you know, if you get hurt, you get up and go back in the game regardless, you know. And that's and I know Roger dealt with that in the NFL in terms of policies that say this is the way we deal with this problem. So every community has a culture, and of course parents can help shape that culture as to how seriously we actually take injuries, and especially head injuries and concussions. The trainers, to what extent are there trainers available? To what extent are there physicians available on the sideline? And again, to what extent are they trained? So I think there's some critical questions that we've talked about today that are important for parents to know about. If you have a child that's going to play sports, you need to know what the risks are, and it's something that we're still evolving in terms of understanding. But I think it's really critical to know what the risks, the resources are that are available. And clearly, more and more, and I hope we can contribute to this, how do we increasingly prevent concussions and other injuries in sports?
I appreciate that. And we're going to be talking about, as Arthur Blank said, variety of sports and both boys and girls. Alexis, let me ask you, you're the CEO of Gen Youth, which is a terrific organization. You're also a mom of 4. Hockey mom, soccer mom. Little girl's out of diapers yet? I'm not sure what she'll be doing. But
she's still in diapers.
She's still in diapers. You hear a lot of these conversations. You're very involved in this issue. You hear Dr. Satcher talk about this. How do you decide with regard to your own children?
Well, first and foremost, I was an athlete, and I credit much of the decisions in my career, in my college decisions, in my career today, based on what I learned in sports. So as a mother, I'm an enormous advocate for kids playing sports. I do believe that the world of sports has changed dramatically from when we were kids. We lived in a world where children had recess every day. How many of us in this room had PE every day? We don't live in that world anymore. Do you know that we live in a country today where only 8% of elementary school students have daily PE, only 4% of middle school students, and only 2% of high school students? It's a crisis. When the First Lady says it's a crisis in physical inactivity, she is absolutely correct. And Dr. Satcher, who wrote a report back in 2004, which I think is one of the most groundbreaking pieces of research ever written, was something called the Learning Connection. And what it says is that a child who eats healthy, starting with a breakfast, and is physically active, even for a minimum of 30 minutes a day, there is a direct correlation on their academic performance, their behavior, their attendance, among many other things. So to me, sports is critical. And as someone who comes from an economic background, the thing that I worry so deeply about is that almost every state and municipality in this country has cut access to physical activity. It's one of the first things that's getting cut in this country, as opposed to making sure that we keep gym in school, as our friends at the NFL Network say. I'll finally just say this. As a mother of 4 kids, I want my children to be student athletes. But as I said, the world has changed, and where I rely on sports and information, and particularly as a mother of kids who are 12 to 1 years old, my kids are doing all of their sports outside the school building, because recreational sports don't start until 7th grade. So it's 7th grade through their senior year. So the role of sports leagues like the National Football League, like the NHL, and the work on USA Hockey, because I happen to have some hockey players, it is the league's responsibility to help us understand what are the risks and the opportunities to play sports. So I feel that yes, specialization, I could go on and on about the risk to specialization, but I do think because we now rely on so many of our sporting activities occurring outside the school building, we need more constituents outside, including the leadership of leagues like the NFL, to help us disseminate these critical messages like player safety.
Those are all fantastic points, and you know, I think the forum hopefully will help educate more. But as Dr. Satcher said, there's a lot of research that still needs to be done, and it's interesting because we talk about football, and we also talk about a lot of sports that girls more predominantly play, and there's been a lot of change with regard to women's athletics overall in the last 40 years, with regard to the opportunities, the resources, and certainly even the types of injuries. So I want to show a quick clip from Kate Carr's organization, Safe Kids USA, and Safe Kids Worldwide now, I guess, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Let's take a look at that clip.
Four decades after Title IX, girls are in the game. They're playing sports, they're being active, they're competing, but we're finding some interesting things about female athletes. One of the things that we've learned is that female athletes are 8 times more likely to sustain an ACL injury than male athletes. That's really important information for us because we can tailor and develop special programs for female athletes to prevent these knee injuries from happening. Safe Kids is excited to learn that more and more teams are taking these exercises and implementing them into their regular warm-up routines to keep girls in the game.
What have you noticed in terms of the kids that you help service, girls in particular, and their participation in sports?
We conduct a number of sports safety clinics each and every single year, and we've been doing this for 5 years now. So we've been able to do thousands of clinics across the United States, and they involve both girls and boys, parents and coaches. What we've learned is there's a real hunger for information about how you can play safely. Our premise is we want every kid to play sports, girls and boys, and have everyone in the game because as the commissioner noted, you learn a lot of things in playing sports. But how can we make sure that when they are on the field, whether it's for practice or for a game, that they're fully prepared? Are they hydrated? Have they had a pre-physical examination or a pre-play examination, I should say? Have they done the right work to make sure that they're prepared in that moment to start the game? You know, have they exercised? Are they just running out onto the field into an intensive sport without being prepared? Are they emotionally ready to play the game? That's another big important question. As a parent of 3, and I have a 17-year-old daughter now who plays 3 sports, so it's a little hard for me to understand that girls may not be playing as many sports as my daughter, but be that as it may, I know they're not. So we know that certain injuries are quite predictable. But we also know that they're preventable. Our clip there made reference to the fact that girls get an ACL injury at a rate that is 8 times higher than boys. We also know that girls report more concussions in sports than boys do. Now, does that mean we don't know the answer why in either case? That's research that we still need to do. So we know that if we can take a step to strengthen a girl's knee or a neck to prevent a concussion, how do we make sure that a coach knows that, a parent knows that, a player knows that, an athletic director knows that everyone who is involved in that young athlete's early career is doing the right thing for that child.
Dr. Sett, I saw you nodding. Did you have a comment about the girls having more concussions?
No, I just thought it was important, as Kate said, to include the fact that when girls are properly trained and muscles are properly developed, they don't have 8 times the risk. And I think that's what we talked about that a little bit today, so we've got to make sure, increasingly in this country, that girls, as they develop, are able to develop the muscles the right way. We know that during puberty, things happen in terms of muscle development. And we know that, as a rule, the neck muscles in girls are frequently weaker, but they don't have to be. They don't have to be so weak that they cannot sustain, certain motions.
Alexis, when you were giving talks for Gen Youth, with regard to girls in sports, I mean, when you're encouraging girls to get involved with sports, is your message different in any way than with boys?
You know, I don't think it's a different message. I think it's how we deliver the message. You know, I look at, we have a program in schools called Fuel Up to Play 60. And so we are fortunate enough to be in 73,000 schools across this country, and we're reaching out to 38 million kids a day. That's a lot. And we have collected just recently some 3-year utilization results on what we're seeing among kids. And in our case, the Play 60, of course, is the National Football League and Arthur Blank and the 32 clubs. And people ask me all the time, they say, you know, Alexis, well, it's football. What do the girls think? Well, let me tell you, the girls actually like it even more. And I have been in school buildings when we have a player, an owner, or we host an event in a stadium, and the girls are on fire. And these young role models, in our case, these young players, are so impressionable for these young women. And so one of the things I think we really need to focus on is how do we create more of those mentors? I don't really believe that we should segregate our approach between boys and girls. I was a basketball player, I was a soccer player. You know, I go about it the same exact approach as I go about it with my kids. But I do think that in today's world, we cannot expect just the coach, just the school building, just the parent. It has to be a coalition. You know, I say to people, and I say this at our board meetings a lot, 1 + 1 + 1 is far greater than 3. And change happens at the local level. We can have these discussions at the national level, but the models and the mentors that these young women need and these young gentlemen need are sitting in this room. You know, think about corporate America. If you look at the Fortune 500 CEOs in this country and you ask what percentage of corporate America and Fortune 500 executives played sports, or sports really drove their decision-making or their decision-making to this day, you'll probably find 90% of them. And so I think we need to really ask ourselves from the outside in how we can have an even more impactful role, whether it's boys or girls inside the school building, and really mentor.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because the whole idea between the benefits and risks of sports, I mean, that's a theme that keeps coming up. I mean, I imagine it informs your speeches, obviously your research, Dr. Satcher. And there's been a lot of interest from a neuroscience perspective, I think, on concussions. People have talked about this quite a bit. I want to dive into that a little bit more, but let me show you another clip from Safe Kids again, talking about concussion specifically, and then I have a little explainer on what happens during a concussion. Take a look.
Head injuries is an emerging issue in sports today. We hear so much about in the news that athletes, both older athletes and younger athletes, are sustaining concussions. When looking at all the different types of sports and activities that kids participate in, we see concussions in quite a few different sports. Not surprisingly, we see football has one of the highest rates of injuries and also one of the highest rates of concussions. We also see this in wrestling, ice hockey, and surprising to some, cheerleading.
A concussion is a brain injury. People think of it as getting your bell rung or getting a ding, but the truth of the matter is that it's a brain injury. the biggest cause of concussion is getting hit to the head, but it can happen in all sorts of different ways. It can happen certainly on a sports field, a helmet-to-helmet collision, for example. But it can also happen in ways that you might not expect. For example, in a car accident, even if your head doesn't hit the dashboard or hit the windshield, just the violent moving back and forth of the brain within the skull during a car accident, for example, can cause a concussion. People think, for example, if this is the brain, around it is a skull, and then you have a helmet, that there's a blow and everything you just get a blow to the brain. That's not exactly what's happening. Typically, if all of a sudden this brain is moving this direction, another helmet, for example, is moving this direction, and then they both suddenly stop, what happens is this brain keeps moving within the skull, bounces back and forth, almost like a beach ball in a swimming pool. And at the same time that's happening, the brain is actually elongating. It's like almost a fluid medium. It feels like almost like jello, and it's going back and forth and stretching out at the same time. And that's really what ends up causing that concussion, that back and forth, that stretching out. One thing to keep in mind about concussions, they don't mean that you necessarily lost consciousness. People can have concussions and have been awake, a really important point. Typically, someone is just going to feel a little bit out of sorts. They may have a hard time figuring out exactly where they are, what their surroundings are. They may be seeing stars, especially in the outside of their vision, the periphery of their vision. Things may sound hollow because their hearing is not quite intact right after a concussion. But typically, it's people around somebody who's had a concussion that are going to notice the most. All people recover differently from concussions. Some people could take weeks to recover. Some people may take just a few days. But the key is that they have to be absolutely symptom-free. They can't have any symptoms at all, because what that means is that the brain is not completely healed. And if the brain is not completely healed and the person gets a second concussion, then all of a sudden you've taken a problem that someone could recover from and turned it into a potentially fatal problem. The brain needs to rest, and that means lots of things. No texting, for example, no screen time. Reading puts a strain on the brain. So you tell people to really completely do nothing, at least for several days, until all of their symptoms has gone away, and then you slowly resume activity.
Great. You see the very bare bones production style there? We're running out of money at CNN. This is, as I said, this is an area of great interest to me. And Dr. Satcher, you started off some of your comments about concussions. We obviously need more research. That's how you sort of ended your remarks. And I think people are realizing and focusing more than ever on this. But where do you think this goes? Is there a medical solution? I ask because something as pragmatic as saying, look, we need to improve helmets. If you understand the physiology of a concussion, you realize that helmets can only help so much. That's right. Where do we go from here?
That was a great piece, by the way.
Thank you. Really. Appreciate that. It was very cheap, too.
And I'll return to the Institute of Medicine report. And the reason, I think next to the Surgeon General, is probably the most reliable report that you can get.
If you do say so yourself.
So considering the way it's done and the way people are selected for the committees. But they talk in detail about the need for more surveillance, and they charge the CDC to take a leadership in terms of improving the surveillance. So we actually have good data on concussions and time to heal and things like that. But they also charge the NIH and the Department of Defense, because we could also talk about problems in the Department of Defense, soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan who have suffered mild traumatic brain injury and all the problems they have, some of them very similar to what we have seen in some former athletes. So the NIH was charged to do research on looking at the course of the illness that you were describing, but also the treatment and the response to various treatments. And I think that's really, really critical. But there also was a charge that we began to look at how policies are affecting us in various states and looking at legislation. So the kind of research that's needed certainly includes better diagnosis of concussions than we have now, and standardization, but also looking critically at treatment. And as you were describing so well, what needs to happen. We had 2 students who participated in our meeting in Washington in November, and both of them had played soccer and had suffered concussions. And they described in detail the difficulty they had in getting back on track, in being able to study, being able to sit in a room with lights, being able to take a test. So return to play is one thing, return to classroom is another. And I think with very serious implications. So we have to be aware of that. But I have to admit that there's still so much that we don't know. The research is critical.
And I'm going to come back to you in a second because I want to talk about the reliability of diagnosis. You bring up a really interesting point, and we place a lot at the ground of sideline exams and being able to tell in sometimes a chaotic environment what's happening. But we'll come back to that. Kate Carr, when you watch a video like that, and again, you get the same questions that I'm asking, and I ask because I get to moderate the panel today, so I don't have to answer the same question. But what do you think about when you hear should somebody playing sports with regard to concussions? How do you balance it for the people that you're helping out?
It's a really great question, but if I can comment on your earlier question about research and what we don't know and then address it. We don't know what goes on inside the brain. I mean, we can measure our heart rate, we can take our pulse, we know if we have a broken bone, but the force of that energy hitting your head, causing the brain to go back and forth, we haven't figured out how much damage is there, how do we diagnose it, how do we treat it. We know from already clinical observations that not everyone has the same not every concussion has the same impact, that one individual could be very different from the same type of blow and have a very different need for a recovery strategy. And we're just beginning to understand what's underlying that, but there's a tremendous amount of research that has to happen. So given what we don't know, given the fact that it's a mystery what's happening inside the brain during this, I think what we have to say to parents and to kids, learn to identify what the symptoms are. For young athletes, don't be afraid to talk about the fact that you have symptoms, because there is a culture, and I've heard from many athletes, that they're just going to shrug it off because they're so excited about playing the game. They want to win. And this isn't something that simply happens in our professional leagues. Our young athletes are inspired by today's athletes. We have to teach an athlete that it's okay to say, I've been injured and it's a concussion, or I think I have a concussion. We have to learn at the sidelines how to evaluate that player to know whether we need to sit them out and for how long they need to be out, not only of play, but out of school, as you say. And then how do we look at the prevention angle? Because there are things that we can do to prevent that injury from happening. In some sports, and I want to applaud the Heads Up activities, the Heads Up campaign that is going on that says we are not going to have that head-on impact in our practices. We're going to teach our players that we're not starting in a three-point stance. So we're adapting and we're changing some of the games, and I think that is clearly reducing the number of concussions that are happening. So how can we do that in practices? How can we adapt even our games? I mean, we haven't adapted hockey yet. And I know, Alexis, your kids are playing hockey, and one's about ready to start checking, and I'm sure you have some anxiety about how do I teach my child things that will help them that we as parents are trying to teach our kids, because we're not sure that the coaches can teach our kids appropriately, or that the athletic director is making sure that even if the regulations are there, that they're being followed through. So it's a bit of a tangle.
Yeah, I would just add too that there's varying degrees of knowledge. And what knowledge we do have is very fragmented. And, particularly as a mother, I have two ice hockey players. You worry about the ref on the ice. You worry about the discussion of the concussion in the locker room. You worry about, yes, one, is the kid going to fess up and say, yes, I'm experiencing these symptoms, but you also worry, is the coach going to recognize the symptoms if the kid isn't willing to talk about the symptoms, right? And those are real risks. To me, someone who's come from media, the thing that I worry greatly about is all the talk and so much of the press is on these catastrophic brain injuries. And yes, they are very, very serious. But are we also talking about the keys to prevention? Are we also disseminating the message in a way that parents like me can understand? One of the reasons I put a lot of, ownership in professional sports is I look at USA Hockey, for example. I have a little one who's been playing hockey since he was 4. Well, he's at what's called the MITE level right now, which is the youngest level of hockey players who can play at the travel level. Well, USA Hockey made a decision, and they decided that kids at that age were going to play cross-ice hockey. USTA, women's tennis, they made a decision several years ago. You know what? This just doesn't seem right. Why are young tennis players playing on the same size court with the same compression ball as a professional tennis player? So they created 10 and under tennis. And now tennis for children who are 10 and under is played cross court. So 2 games are going on simultaneously. To me, these are really big strategic changes. Now, it's not specific, of course, to the dissemination and the knowledge of concussions, but I'll tell you, with 2 kids who do play hockey and one who is beginning to check, the rigor with which they sit down with us to discuss the risk to concussions, the paperwork that we have to sign, it's serious. The helmets, they won't let you on the ice right now unless you have certain specific parameters that have been agreed and signed off, and you've got these stickers on the back of your helmets. They've become, in the past, I'd say, couple of years, far more strict than we were when our kids first started playing hockey. So I think enormous progress is being made, but as a parent, I would argue, where do I go to find all these resources? I'm fortunate that I have kids in a hockey program where they're telling me about these risks. But I also have a soccer player, and I've never heard one iota about the concussion risk for soccer players, and that's one of the highest concussed sports. So I think there's still a vacuum of information and awareness building that we need to ensure that we are addressing, and we in the media.
Yeah, and you should visit the Safe Kids Worldwide website, because they have a lot on soccer and concussions on that site.
Thanks for that plug.
Well, Dr. Satcher, let me ask you something that I think we like things to be sort of scientific and binary and have yes/no answers. Does someone have a concussion, or do they not? And on a sideline exam, even if the player is taken out of a chaotic environment, how would you characterize how good we are at initially diagnosing the concussion, saying this player has a concussion, they need to come out of the game?
Well, Sanjay, you remember in medical school, we were taught to assess the problem using the subjective information, the objective, then we do an assessment and a plan. And for the most part, it's all subjective, right? We ask questions and we listen to the responses of the player, but we don't have that objective information yet. Hopefully that day will come soon. But I think for the most part, I think it's fair to say that we're dealing with subjective information in making a diagnosis. And that's not to put it down. Subjective information, asking the players how they feel, do they know where they are, what day it is, and things like that. But again, we rely upon the players to be honest. And as you know, there are certain players who want to go back into the game, regardless of what they've experienced. And we have to be aware of that, because that's the culture. That gets back to the Institute of Medicine's report about the culture of sports now and why it leads some people to disregard very serious things like concussions. So I think we need that sideline evaluation. We need well-trained people. But we also have to remember that we have communities in this country, low-income communities where the resources are just not there. A lot of times that means the trainer is not there. Sometimes the coach is not adequately trained to assess injuries and to really teach players how to avoid them. So we got to deal with all of those issues on the sideline. All sidelines are not the same.
Right, right. I'm just curious real quick, it's a subjective analysis, subjective to diagnose someone with a concussion. You say we hope the day will come where it's an objective. Well, can you forecast the future? What does that mean? I mean, do you envision some sort of scan on the sideline, or what would that look like?
I wouldn't dare tell you what that means, because you know, I do think, though, the technology is improving, right? And Alexis talked about the imaging that allows us to see that a child who's physically active, the hippocampus is operating better, circulation is better, so we can see not only can we know that the child is performing better, but we can see the brain changing. And I think the day is going to come when we're going to have the kind of technology that we can have on the sideline that can help us to diagnose concussions. I don't know how close it is, but I think it's going to come.
Kate, we did a documentary looking at this concussion exam and how to do that. And one of the things that really emerged when we started reporting this was athletic trainers and the value that they serve on the sideline. To be able to, they're trained, they're able to recognize these types of concussions. And they seem very important to have at any game and practices as well. What are you finding in terms of those types of resources? Even if we're well aware of concussions and parents are educated and even the players, to have some sort of medically trained person available at any given time?
Well, there simply aren't enough. There aren't enough trainers. We might find them in high school sports. We'll definitely find them in college sports. But we're not going to find them in the youth leagues, where the coach could be a parent who's never had an iota of training on anything to do with prevention of any kind of injury. Because they're volunteers, and I'm not trying to slam them whatsoever. I'm just saying, here's the fact of where we are today. So getting an athletic trainer into every community at the youth sports level, I think is going to be very, very challenging. It's a resource issue. And we're already talking about not enough kids being in sports. So how do we deal with that situation? Can we look at any coach having to pass some type of certification program, no matter what level they're playing at? And maybe it becomes more advanced as you go up the ladder of sports into older ages. But even at that, the 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds who are out there on the soccer field, who are emulating perhaps an older sibling or a friend, and they're running around, they're tripping. I've had my kids play soccer. It's bedlam out there, but and it was a parent coaching. Should we put a certification program in place to make sure that the very fundamentals are understood by all, and that parents have access to that information? And we live in a world, I don't have to tell you this, we live in a world where we get a lot of information electronically, and we can use channels that enable a parent or a coach to do something that is electronic education. It doesn't have to be person to person. I believe person to person is best, but I would strongly advocate for a certification program for everyone, because I don't think we'll get to athletic trainers for all.
Just from a pragmatic standpoint, do you have any idea what kind of resources we're talking about? If you hire an athletic trainer for a community, for a school system, I mean, do you know what we're looking at, what we're talking about here?
No, I don't. But I do know that the cost of injuries, injuries that show up in the emergency room, is close to $1 billion. So we're spending a lot of money just on our healthcare costs for preventable injuries related to youth sports. And we ought to take a look at what the value of the investment is on the prevention side to counterbalance that. There's a value proposition there that I think we need to fully explore.
And just to be clear, the hindrance you think is more to do with money, or is it this idea that communities say, we don't need that, we're doing just fine?
I believe with all of the attention that's going on, particularly around the concussion issue, But I would be remiss if I didn't point out that we definitely have an issue with overuse injuries that is brought around by the specialization that was mentioned earlier, that we definitely have children who die from heat injuries, just heat stroke, because they're not drinking enough water. So we have to look at all of this and get the word out in a very thorough fashion. I think it does come down to resources. When you think of, I'm sure probably the majority of people here either played in a youth league or had a kid in a youth league or certainly knew a kid in a youth league. Those are very community-based programs that are resource-strapped. And so I wish I knew what the number was. I don't.
I'm just curious, you know, to give some context. Alexis, you know, it was mentioned that we don't play as much. You mentioned those in your remarks as well. The kids, the participation in random play as well as competitive play has gone down. Competitive play, you know, those numbers more recently, you see a decline there. And I'm wondering, you know, there's all sorts of different reasons. Mr. Blank mentioned many of them. What do you think is driving that primarily? Why is there that decrease?
You know, our specialty is the school building. And without a doubt, we have seen what we would call competing barriers is the #1 reason for why kids are not nearly as active as they were before. And what we define as competing barriers is specifically the focus on education and, in this world, standardized testing. I don't think it was a consequence or a plan of No Child Left Behind, but I do think an unintended consequence was that more time has been taken out of things like recess and PE and has been redirected toward education and preparation for standardized tests. So that is the #1 reason I think we repeatedly hear about in the school building. #2, resource constraints are enormous. I would argue, you know, to Kate's point before, that is the critical concern. In fact, for us, we find that in schools across this country, it's not always a guarantee that a school is going to have a PE teacher. In many cases, in schools that we work with, we are working with a history teacher or an English teacher. They don't even necessarily have a nurse's practitioner in the school building. So the thought of even having a trainer is far-reaching. It is an enormous resource constraint. The third thing is safety. That is one of the biggest escalating issues if you look over the past couple of decades. Are the playgrounds and the communities within which our kids are playing safe? And we find that you know, the unfortunate thing is that more and more kids, you know, 600 kids in an average school are sharing one gymnasium, if that. So that helps explain to some degree why there is such a decline in physical activity, because for many of us, we lived in a world where you could, you know, play stickball or run down the street. And so safety is a really critical issue in the school building and the surrounding communities. You know, I think the other thing I'd say is, you know, for the decline, we have to re-emphasize the importance as we talk about the learning connection. You know, Sanjay, I come from media like, I'll tell you, when I came to do this 3 years ago, I never thought I'd be in the philanthropy world, spending a decade in Wall Street and in media. But when I met Dr. Satcher and learned about the learning connection, I was so astounded that there was this thing called the science that would actually demonstrate to the hippocampus what is happening to that child's brain with just 30 minutes of physical activity. And I remember saying to Dr. Satcher here in Atlanta, I'm a mother. How come I don't know this? And now my oldest is 12 years old. And Logan plays lots of sports, and he's a writer for Sports Illustrated. And I went to Dr. Satcher's initial conference in November about youth sports safety, and I promised that Logan would write an article about concussions, and he did. But I just see the difference in my son. And I just wonder if more of us were aware of why these declines are happening and why it's important to bring physical activity back. You know, I think people perceive, oh, well, sports or the risks of specialization or the risks of injury. But we need to stop looking at the glass as half empty and look at the glass as half full. And you know, I go to funders across the country to explain to them why I think they need to invest in what we're doing in the school building. And I say to them all the time, you know, K through 12 is prevention. Almost every corporation in America, along with almost every state and municipality in this country, is worried about one thing: escalating healthcare costs. They're worried about it for their employees, and they're worried about it for their families. They're also worried about a future workforce. They're worried about those future engineers. What did we miss when we decided that play wasn't critical to education, to health, to our future workforce? So to me, play and safe play is about creating healthy, high-achieving students who are going to grow up one day to be someone sitting in this room. So we have to change, as far as I'm concerned, the conversation. And part of changing the conversation is empowering the student. And that's what we've focused on in Fuel to Play 60, is how do we put the student at the center of the conversation? How do we equip that child to be their own ambassador and advocate? And so we've been able to do that for nutrition and physical activity. I'd love to see us be able to do that for safety.
There is some good news, though, that we shouldn't miss. I mean, the New York Times this morning had a headline about the decline in childhood obesity. And, you know, it's hard to know exactly what that means, but whether it's a 43% declines in the last 10 years or whether it's 20%, we're moving in the right direction. And I give people, you know, like, well, you know, the Surgeon General's report in 2001, but that was just the beginning. But I think the First Lady and Let's Move, and I think the funding is the Surgeon General's report.
I'm so proud of him.
And in the NFL and the National Dairy Council, all funding Fuel Up to Play 60, and they just made a commitment to 5 more years of funding at what, $250 million? Amazing commitment. So I think we should know that we are making progress in that area. We're saving a lot of lives. We're saving a lot of children from diabetes and hypertension. So it's not time to rest by any means. But I think we should know that if we stay the course here, we can make a difference, especially for our children.
I really appreciate you bringing that up. You know, I've been doing the medical reporting for 12 years, and I think it's the first time, really, that we've reported some positive movement with regard to this issue. So I didn't think I'd see it at certain times. So it's great to point that out. Let me ask you, though, if you just had any insights to the same question I was asking Alexis about team sports, competitive sports, actually the decline in participation in those. I mean, I don't know that there's an absolute answer. I'm just curious to your impressions.
Well, I'm not sure there's one answer, but I think there are a lot of things going on in our society around that. As Alexis pointed out, there's so many schools now that don't have physical education teachers. You ask about the cost of trainers, and schools are saying that they cannot afford one physical education teacher. And that's the bad news. I think the good news is that a lot of teachers have taken it up on themselves. Some of the math teachers who take 10, 15 minutes out of a class, they keep teaching, but they get the kids up and moving. There are schools that have developed programs in the gym so that when kids get out off the bus in the morning, they go through or to the gym and are able to be physically active for 30 minutes. I think Dr. Fitzgerald is here, Director of Public Health. Yeah, she chairs the Governor's Council on Childhood Obesity, on which I serve. But I think, again, we're looking throughout the state of Georgia at what's happening at schools. And it's amazing how innovative some schools have been and how innovative some teachers have been in making sure that children get physical activity, even though they might not have a physical education teacher. So we really should take our hats off to people who take very seriously our responsibility to make sure that our children are able to be physically active. And we have a lot of churches in our community where there are not a lot of resources for physical activity, but we've had 10 pastors to go through our program and to go back to their churches and develop community programs in physical activity and good nutrition. So we got to keep pushing those kinds of things.
I would just add back to your question, Sanjay, in terms of the decline in competitive sports. You know, Brian Hainline from the NCAA is here, and he's a good friend, and we had a conversation about 6 months ago, and I was talking to him about the fact that I do have kids who are really deeply specializing at a young age, and I want to do everything in my power not to have them specialize. And one of the things he said to me is, he said, Alexis, you know, children who are prepubescent, if they're focused too much on one sport, there are unintended negative consequences to what he calls the ABCs, yes? Agility, balance, and coordination. Thank you. And he taught me so much. And I've actually taken this conversation, and we talked about strength and stamina, among other things, and I've gone and talked about it with other parents who I'm playing with to say, listen, we need to, particularly in sports like hockey, where a season runs anywhere from 6 to 9 months, and then there's an expectation that you're going to specialty sport camps and things of that nature, that we need to make sure that we are carving out the time to make sure that kids can play multiple sports. But I will say, in regards to specialization, my number one concern about specialization is that I don't know in my heart of hearts if it's the child that's driving it. I believe it is the adult and the college acceptance rate that is driving it. And to me, that is very disconcerting, because what kids are being told is you need to be a prodigy in a sport to get into an excellent institution, instead of being told you need to be an intercollegiate athlete who prioritizes academics as much as you prioritize your commitment to sports. So to me, that's an enormous concern that I think we need to address.
We work with Dr. James Andrews, who literally wrote the book on overuse injuries, Any Given Monday. And what is happening is that, you're right, Alexis, kids are out there, whether they're driving themselves or their parents are driving them, they're playing the same sport day after day after day. And the results are more injuries. So you see overuse injuries, whether it's pitching or knee injuries or whatever, so that their future career in sports at a high school or college level is completely jeopardized because they have played themselves out of the game. They can also be subject to burnout. Kids need a break. They need to have a break every week. They need a day or two off where they're not playing their sport. And they need a season where they're not playing the same sport. They need to have a break to do something else. It's emotionally healthy for them. It's physically healthy for them. And we have to get the word out on that. This is not rocket science. Take a break. You know, there are so many simple things that we know. Drink your water, take a break, have fun, enjoy it. This is not about the end game all the time. Some of it is about the joy and fun of sports. And have we robbed our children of that? In some ways, I think we have. The other issue that we can touch on, and it might be an important one, is what is an economy that has been a downturn economy? What impact is that having on kids playing team sports? Because I think there is an economic factor in it as well. Because sports, the equipment that you need, the shoes that you need, the helmets that you need, the clothes that you need, there's a cost associated with that, and it could be economic, and that's even sadder.
Yeah, no, these are really good points. And I'm glad we brought this part of the issue up as well, because we talk about the risk of injury, we talk about the decline, and there's this other whole thing where you got children who are hyper-specializing, joining these elite travel teams, whether it's parental pressure or not. This may surprise you, Alexis. My parents didn't pressure me to play sports. They didn't have a lot of faith in my my abilities long run. But it is a real concern, and we are seeing these overuse injuries. We're going to open this up into the audience in just a minute, but there is a clip that we want to show from Safe Kids about overuse injuries.
Parents these days are getting invitations for their kids to play on travel teams or play select sports. And that's great. We want kids to play, but they're really playing more and more games than ever before. And there are things that parents should be concerned about as it relates to overuse injuries. Some examples of overuse injuries in young athletes that parents might see include shin splints, Achilles tendonitis, runner's knee, or even pitcher's elbow. There are 3 things that parents can do to reduce the risk of overuse injuries in their young athletes. The first is making sure that that young athlete has at least 1 to 2 days of rest in a week from any given sport. The second is to make sure that they honor a true off season, and that means that they take off at least 10 consecutive weeks from one particular sport. It doesn't mean that they can't play other sports during that time, but they want to not play a sport where there's the same muscle emphasis. And then lastly, we want to make sure that parents kind of think about that 10% rule. And what that means is that a child is not increasing their activity by more than 10% in a week's time. For example, with runners, we want to make sure that they are not going from a 5K to a 10K in a week. That really gives their body a chance to recover and prevent those overuse injuries from happening.
We just had the Olympics, so inspirational. We tell these kids 10,000 hours to master a sport, and on the other hand, you have the risk of overuse injuries. How do you balance that?
Well, I think we're all guilty of that too. I used to be a long distance runner. I run now, but I know that I have trouble, really controlling myself and not overdoing it. And that's injuries come from overdoing things that are really good for you, but we have to train children, I think, from a very early age, as was stated here, that rest is important. Rest is a part of developing your body. So it's physical activity, workouts, but it's also rest. Give the muscles time, not only to heal, but to begin to grow in the right way. So, but I think we've all been guilty of overdoing it, and especially people who get involved in long-distance running and triathlons, stuff like that.
I want to open it up to the audience questions, but let me just ask you, because I'm curious, former Surgeon General, how is your health now? What do you do to keep yourself healthy?
Well, I ran track at Morehouse, and I was telling a group of kids last week that it's been so long ago until there's almost nobody left around to refute me when I say how great I was. But no, I have a balanced approach. I ran the Marine Corps Marathon my last year as Surgeon General, and I think I decided after running the Marine Corps Marathon that I needed to find something else to do. So I was telling Arthur, when we moved to Atlanta, we moved on the lake out at Lake Spivey, so I'm into rowing, which is a great exercise. I still do walking and running when I'm traveling. So I think the main thing is for everybody to find something that they enjoy doing and to do it on a regular basis. And to also engage in healthy nutrition, especially, as we say on the Surgeon General's prescription, adequate fruits and vegetables, low-fat milk, lean meat or fish and chicken. It's not difficult, and just as we develop bad habits, we can develop good habits. We can develop good habits of regular physical activity. We can develop good habits of eating fruits and vegetables, and our children can. And I think our responsibility is to make sure, as we say when we develop Action for Healthy Kids, and Roger served on that board, our goal was that every child would be able to develop a lifetime habit of physical activity and good nutrition. And I think it's the goal every parent should have, in conjunction with the schools, is that every child develop lifetime habits of physical activity and good nutrition.
Can develop.
And that keeps you going even when you're as old as I am. It really does.
Or as young as you are.
You can develop good habits. I mean, that goes without saying, obviously. It's interesting. My mom always told me when I was young that it took 21 days to develop a habit. I thought that was sort of interesting, but I thought it was sort of, apocryphal mom sort of advice. Do the same thing for 21 days, it becomes a habit. Wouldn't you know it, 10 years into my career as a journalist, there's a study that comes out that said it takes 21 days to actually develop a habit. I have not heard the end of that from my mother. It's been 2 years now.
It's amazing.
Let's open this up. The webcast has been watching us as well. We got some questions, I know, from the viewers who are watching there. And we have a mommy blogger, I believe, here today, Sojourner Grimmett. Are you here? All right. I know you've been monitoring questions from the webcast.
A question that we have here, it seems every summer there are news stories about serious injuries and even fatalities from heat and dehydration. What can we do to fix this?
Dr. Satcher, this seems like low-hanging fruit. I mean, in the context of all the things that we've talked about, but it's a really important question.
Yeah, education, I think. And with our children, we have to work with them in terms of developing the right habits. But I think to a great extent, it's education, but it's also being able to really work with children around the importance of rest, the importance of being aware of your body and listening to your body, as opposed to pushing your body. And I know that's a thing that in sports that we do, we push our bodies as far as we can push them. And that may be something to be said for that, but there's also something to be said for taking care of your body, which includes rest. But being aware of certainly body temperature and the fact that, you can overheat your body just as you can other things.
Yeah. And again, a lot of this is about education, as I think all of you have said. Let's take some audience questions. We have 2 microphones over here. If you wouldn't mind just telling just a sentence about who you are.
I'm Reggie Washington, and among other things, I represent Action for Healthy Kids. And David, I must comment, we finally found a way to make you look good, and that's surround you by people who look better than you.
Do you know this guy?
Not really. Reggie Washington is an outstanding pediatric cardiologist from Colorado, and now he followed me in chairing the board of Action for Healthy Kids. Great guy, despite,
A comment about the title of this is Making Play Safe for Kids, not Athletics Safe for Kids. So I'll represent the slugs in the audience for a minute. We have to change the public will. We haven't talked much about public will tonight, but we need to change the public will, and I'll give you 2 examples. I have a grandson who unfortunately has a great basketball career ahead of him. He's 11 years of age, plays on 3 teams. If he went up to one of his coaches and said, I'm going to take a month off, he's off the team. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So we need to change that, or at least realize that's true. But a larger problem about dropout that no one has mentioned yet, if you look at what happens in this country, you play sports, you're about 5 or 6 years of age, everybody's having fun. And then what? You try out for a team. And you either make the team, or so you're on the travel squad with all the fancy bags and all the rest, or you go to the recreational league. For someone who was on a recreational league, that's translated to you're no good, you're a slug. And as we go on in this country, used to be slugs could play in the street and play stickball and all that. Those opportunities are no longer available. So by the time you're 10, you have absolutely no opportunity to play sports. And there have been several studies that have shown over 50% of kids have 0 physical activity by the time they're 10 years of age. And shame on us because the public will hasn't demanded an opportunity for those kids to participate. So I think one of the things we have to do, along with making playing safe, we need to give kids an opportunity to play that is not athletics.
That's a great point.
Excellent
Thank
point.
you. Doctor?
I'm Brian Hainline, and I have the privilege of serving as NCAA Chief Medical Officer and also serving on the board with Alexis for Gen Youth and serving with Dr. Satcher for the National Council today. Alexis talked about friendship, and she's taught me to start seeing the world as, or the glass as being half full, and so I wanted to share a half-full comment and see if you all might agree with that. Because I see two very important cultural shifts despite all the negative things we've talked about. One is I don't think we can overstate the importance of when Commissioner Goodell put his hand up and said, sports are great, but they must be safe. And the world stopped. Yeah. It was such an extraordinary event. And that still is having a seismic effect. And we similar have seen that with Dr. Mark Emmert, the president of the NCAA, who couldn't put his hand up in the same way because he's dealing with 1,200 member institutions. But he challenged the leadership of all of the 1,200 member institutions to say, if we're going to continue with sports, health and safety must be first and foremost for the student athlete. So there's a cultural shift that's happening. I'm not saying it's arrived, but it's palpable and it's real. So that's one cultural shift. And the other is, Dr. Satcher, today you referenced many times the Institute of Medicine report. And even the way you conducted the meeting today, you said if we're going to make decisions, they must be evidence-based. It just can't be consensus coming from somewhere else. And that report actually has mobilized the scientific community. And I have a very palpable sense that within the next year, we're going to see a broad coalition of research on concussion that we've never seen before. Right now, it's been in silos, in multiple silos, but I'm seeing a willingness of people to actually share data and come together. And so that's a cultural shift in medicine. So I am, Alexis, I'm seeing the glass half full, and I know we have our work cut out for us, but I think it's important to mention that.
Great. Very good. Very good.
And if I could add two quick points. One, Reggie, to your comment about play. What we have found in Fuel Up to Play 60, and I applaud, first and foremost, just like Brian did, I applaud the commissioner because he decided to stand up for Play 60. And a lot of people ask me this same question repeatedly, well, does this mean that you're only pushing football? And I say, no. What we are advocating for is how can we help kids get 60 minutes of physical activity every day, whether that's before, during, and after the school building. So, one, I applaud you, and I'm fortunate enough to be working with the NFL, but I think they were very forward-thinking in their approach. But the other thing is, to your point on play, one of the things that we have found, we offer schools in Fuel to Play 60 what we call the playbook, and it's got the X's and O's. But really what it is it's a toolkit of resources for educators to use. And we offer them the same sample of plays in physical activity as we do in nutrition. We offer up to 30 in each. But over the past 3 years, what we have done is said, let's narrow our focus and let's take our learnings from the school building and truncate those down into 5 physical activity plays that we know are working in the school building and 5 nutrition plays that we know are very successful. And as I mentioned to you today, some of the most successful physical activity plays that we see schools adopt through Fuel Up to Play 60 in the school building have to do with dance. And so what we're seeing in our data and our research is we are seeing the types of physical activity change quite dramatically. And it's not only addressing play, and to your point, those who don't make the team, but we also have to make sure that we are creating an environment with anyone, regardless of physical capability, feels welcome to be in an environment where they can be active. And so to me, that is in part mission critical for the girls who don't want to specialize in a sport, who want to be a musician, and bravo, but they also want to have some physical activity. And so we've seen as one of our biggest aha moments is the growth in things like dance as a solution inside the school building.
I couldn't dance either.
Doesn't mean you have to be coordinated. It just means you have to be moving.
Got it. Okay. Please.
Hi, I'm Jackie Epping. I'm with the Physical Activity and Health Branch at the Centers for Disease Control. And first of all, I think someone slipped Reggie my comments and questions before I got up here, at least a piece of them. Thank you so much for a very informative panel discussion, and thanks also to the Blanks and to Commissioner Goodell for giving this kind of visibility to such an important issue. There are two issues that I've seen us touch on a little bit, but not as much as I'd like to, frankly. And one of those has to do with this culture that we keep referring to. You know, we're in a culture where a kid doesn't want to let us know that they've been injured, or specifically that they're experiencing symptoms of a concussion, because they want to get back in the game and play. And I've heard a little bit about, well, we need to talk to the kids. Well, the kids are not responsible for creating this culture, I don't think. And so I'm interested in what you all think about who has created it, who is responsible, and what else besides talking to our kids about this do we need to do? And somewhat related to that, and it's because I'm trying to lead you, I guess, to the conversation, but among the top 1 or 2 reasons that kids give for dropping out of sports at about adolescence is it's no longer enjoyable. And can we speak to why that's happening as well?
Kate, let me ask you with regard to the culture, first of all, and she brings up a good point, because we talk about this issue, but we don't really address it head on or talk about some of the solutions around it. First of all, you agree with this, in terms of where the change in culture comes from?
The change in culture probably has to come from a lot of different places, but I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you have been on the sidelines of a game and have seen another parent completely misbehaving, yelling at their kid, show of hands, really acting, Exactly. Now, I hope you weren't that parent, okay? If you were, button it up, zip it. We have to, as parents, really remember that we can bring the joy to the game. It's not just about driving our kid there and bringing them home, cheering them on for their successes and failures. Just the fact that they're there and that we encourage them to be there, to play safely, to get out there and do something, to move and to do something that you love. And I think finding out what motivates a child to love a sport, because not all children are going to love the same sport. What is it that we discover about that magic that we can instill in our child about loving it? So the culture, whether it's the parent berating the athlete, or the coach berating the athlete, or another player berating a team member, this is a community attitude that we can change. And we can change it by calling each other out. And we simply have to do that. And so I'm a strong believer in that.
I would also argue it's media. I mean, what role do we in media play in glorifying these superstar athletes so that most kids,
Do you see some of those slalom runs? They were pretty sweet.
Right? I mean, think about the stories that NBC told about those athletes in Sochi, right? We now live in a media world that maybe we just didn't live in 10, 20 years ago. And yes, obviously social media, of course, but these are our heroes and our champions. And I think for young kids, particularly for my boys, oh my goodness, I mean, they're glued to the television on Sunday, we can't talk. But I do think that one of the things I've learned a lot from the players that we work with in the NFL, and I gave this example at our Youth Sports Safety Council meeting today, is I will never forget, probably for the rest of my career, what happened with Alex Smith and the San Francisco 49ers. And I was, if you don't know Alex Smith from San Francisco, well, sorry, he's now the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's doing pretty well. But in any event, I will never forget what happened to him because he did have a concussion. He did get a concussion. And I think he handled himself so remarkably. He lost his starting job as quarterback to Colin Kaepernick. And in the midst of it, he did the right thing. He did the right thing given what had happened to him. And he sat out that second half of that season with the 49ers. And boy, oh boy, let me tell you, yes, was I rooting for Andy Reid on the sidelines for Kansas City? But I was rooting for Alex Smith because I thought this guy is a kind of guy that I want my kids to look at and look at closely because he was honest about his situation. He was honest about the degree of the concussion. And you know what? It did cost him his job there, but look at what has happened since then. I think if we could take those examples, like Dr. Satcher talked about, the two athletes who came to the meeting in November, we have a handful of those examples. We can learn something from those athletes because I do believe that those athletes have an enormous impression on these kids. And that if we put those right stories in front of them that can demonstrate what happens and why, they'll learn from them in a way that a parent telling you, a coach telling you, a teacher telling you, just it's not the same.
Let me get a question here in the front row.
I'm Angie Masuga, a concerned soccer mom. My question is kind of two-part. It's how do you tell a coach that, hey, we need to be taking 10 weeks off a year? We tried to plan a vacation 2 years in advance and couldn't even get a date for, when would be a good week to go. So how do you talk to your coach about that? It sounds great to me, but, then you worry about having your spot on the team.
It's a good question. I don't know if somebody wants to take that, but this has come up a couple times now. I mean, we'd like to give good advice and say, hey, we should get the rest and take 10 weeks off a year, but you're counterbalancing that with all the other things that we're talking about.
I'll speak to that because I have a 17-year-old daughter. She's a junior in high school, and she really loves sports. In her sophomore year, she played on she was on the varsity volleyball team, which was the thrill of her life. She was following in the footsteps of her older sister with the same coach. And then she wanted to play on club volleyball, and they overlapped. So she was in practice or games every day of the week, and on the weekends with club. So she would go from school practice to club practice to weekends full of games and tournaments. And so then it was, okay, school was finished, but club was going on. But then soon softball started, and she was catcher. So 2 seasons of volleyball and playing softball as catcher. What happened? She had a knee injury, torn meniscus, and she wound up sitting out a good part of the season, and then ultimately had surgery on her knee. I learned from that, and sadly a little bit too late to prevent that injury. Should I have said, you have to make a choice. These 3 sports, one right after the other and overlapping, is too much. It's too much for you. So when you plan when you're signing up for whatever the soccer teams are, I would say take a look at it. And what becomes the too much and what becomes the break. It's not that you have to not play soccer, but in talking to the coach and educating the coach that my young athlete will actually be a better athlete if they do something different for a period of time. And that's a proven fact. I mean, that is medical advice. Thank you, Dr. Satcher, for your head moving in the right direction. It's very nervous. I'm not a doctor, and I'm between two. Talk about feeling outnumbered. So, we do have some control. We do think that our kids rule our lives, and, that's hard. Try telling your teenager no on anything, but we have to. And we have to teach them and help them become educated and also educate the coach.
You wonder, are they going to be able to walk when they're 30 years old? Because these girls come off the field, they're 16 years old, and they hurt from their head to their toes. And you worry, I mean, we haven't had, knock on wood, we haven't had a lot of injuries, but are they going to, playing that much has got to wear their body out?
I was just going to add two things, and they relate to two of our committees. We have 5 committees on the council, and 2 of them I'll mention. I think some of these issues are community issues. It's hard for one parent or one player to do it alone. Mm-hmm. And you really sometimes need to get together and talk about what's important, because the culture is a community phenomenon. And so just as it operates that way, you have to change it that way. And the other thing, of course, that we've learned in public health is that sometimes policy change is the best way to change culture. Now, look at what happened with smoking and health. I think it was in 1987 that the state of California was the first state to pass legislation outlawing smoking in public places. Now, we think about that and we say, well, that meant that people were not exposed to smoke when they went out to the park or went to a restaurant. Atlanta now has a park restriction. But it did something else. It changed the culture. It made it no longer cool to be smoking around people. So things that in the past had been a part of the culture, it was cool to smoke, all of a sudden, it wasn't cool to be seen smoking. And so people stopped because they didn't want to be a part of something that was not cool and was not socially acceptable. I think we've got to get that way with a lot of the approaches to these injuries and to fatigue, is that we've got to come together as a community and talk about this. Parents are part of the problem, by the way, you know that, right? Just like fans are part of the problem. And so it becomes a community issue when you try to get people together and to say that, we need to think about this. Our kids are at risk. We know that kids ought to be able to get a break and get rest. And then I think coaches will change.
We got just a couple more minutes. I know there's a few questions. If you, just a sentence about yourself and your question.
Yes, Tyron Williams, co-founder of Georgia Elite Sports Academy, a youth football program. And I've been coaching youth football for about 5 years. But one of the things I wanted to say, I learned so much tonight by listening to the panel and the questions that was asked. I would love to see this type of discussion in the community level. Have some people that are knowledgeable to get into this type of format inside of the grassroots levels down in the community. I think that'll serve real well. And as a coach, I always tell my parents, we have to redefine what winning is at that level. Because I always tell my parents, I say, look, the scoreboard, as long as they're keeping the score, I want to win, but that's not winning. When I look at the induction into the Hall of Fame, I never hear the players talk about how they won that plastic trophy and life's changed for them. They talked about the coach made a significant difference in their life. So what we have to do is educate the coaches and let them understand that winning is not really winning on the scoreboard when it comes to the kids at that level. It's winning their hearts and their minds and keeping them physically fit. And if you got that kind of mindset as a youth coach, then if a kid have to take time off, it shouldn't be that big of a deal, because that's going to help them win in life wherever they're going with their families and doing the things that they're doing. So we definitely got to redefine winning at the youth level, because that's a lot of the problems when it comes to youth sports. Okay, so that's what I'd like to say.
That's a great point. Thank you very much. Commissioner?
I was just going to ask if Scott Hallenbach, who's here, is head of USA Football. We have developed a program with Scott, and I'll ask you to come up, Scott, because you can address this quickly, called Heads Up Football, and it's through USA Football. It engages the parents, it certifies the coaches, and addresses a lot of the issues that are raised tonight by many of you, but I think it's worth just a quick synopsis of that. Scott.
Okay. So we start with coaching education, and it starts with an online program where they have to pass 16 chapters and basically have to pass it 80%, or they have to go back and redo it. so we can track it, number one, which is incredibly important. But then one of the things we learned from that is we weren't confident that they were transferring that knowledge to the field. So then we added another important component called the player safety coach, which is an on-site component. I think someone brought up the idea that both the online and the in-person is critical. So then we added that, and we work with organizations across the country to train their player safety coach, and then they have to go back. They're the eyes and ears. They do the assessment and verification piece. Can the coach actually fit equipment? Do they know concussion recognition and response? Do they know how to teach heads-up tackling? But then the next biggest component, and it's been brought up here, is the idea of parents. We say you cannot change the behavior of at least football in this case, but it's true for all youth sports, if we don't engage the parents. And they have to be part of the actual solution. They have to be educated. So they have to know how to help fit equipment. They have to know to take responsibility and make sure the kid has a mouthpiece when he goes to practice. Don't leave that to the coach all the time. You know, understand signs and symptoms of concussion. A headache when a headache shows up 24 hours later, 48 hours later, what do you do? And then, of course, be responsible and understand what heads-up tackling is. We talked to many parents, and they had no idea. They love the sport. They actually are, you know, they drop their kid off. They're there. They monitor it, but they have no idea what the coaches are doing. They're literally just turning over their most precious resource to the coach, and they're hopeful that they do know what they're doing, and the fact of the matter is most of them don't. So it's an education program engaged with both online and in person, and then there's a train-the-trainer program that requires people to monitor and stay in touch and reduce contacts. It's a multifaceted program that definitely is making a difference.
Is this something the NFL funds? And so they fund the schools?
Absolutely.
Come to the NFL for funding for this sort of thing?
Well, so they come to USA Football and we do the training there. But yes, the NFL and the 32 teams are very much involved. Absolutely.
Terrific. We're getting really close on time, and so I'm going to ask just two people standing for a while, so I don't want to ignore you, but please give a quick comment or a quick question. Yes.
My name is Kelly Brown. I'm the youth coordinator for Health Org Inc., and we're located in the English Avenue, Vine City neighborhood. But I just wanted to give a sort of suggestion for alternatives to resource and PE in the classrooms. For early childhood, 0 to 5 years, we're required to take them out every day. And so if you go on the playground with 10 to 15 children, there's not always enough swings or somebody's going to be fighting over the slide. So in the lesson plans, you incorporate what you learned inside when you go outside. So you could do maybe a scavenger hunt. And, you know, that seems sort of remedial, but the teachers of the older children can do the same thing. They can take them outside to do activities that are still relevant to what they're learning inside. It's not, you know, running and jumping, but it's still a change of scenery, outside activity, and a way to incorporate some movement.
That's great, yeah. You know, and Alexa, you sort of made this point as well, but, you know, we think of these things in silos. We think education over here, physical activity over here, and there's been data for a long time to show the impact on early childhood development. But then this, you know, taking it to the next level, saying there are activities that directly teach some of the concepts that are going on in the classroom. It's a really good point. Doctor?
Hi, my name is Sujit Sharma. I'm a pediatric ER doctor here in town at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and I happen to be at work today and taking care of a 15-year-old boy. He's in 10th grade, star athlete. He came in with obvious overuse injury, and because he's on running track on a Saturday and then playing football and training for practice and everything on the next day. When I gave him the news that there's just no way he can get back into playing the next weekend, he was actually relieved. And so that was a good sign that there were, I mean, he was getting peer pressure. There's actual peer pressure from not just the coaches, but the other players. They know that if he doesn't show up, I mean, he's running a 100-meter dash in 10.9 seconds. And so if he doesn't show up, the whole team is going to suffer. So you guys, there's some obvious advances we're making in the information. But I went on to ask him, how are you, treating yourself? I mean, how are you eating? Are you eating better to try and help with your own healing and recovery? And, he bowed his head at that, and his mother started saying, oh, I can't get him to stop eating the junk food and this. I'm like, then we started getting into discussion. It doesn't happen often. I've recently become much more interested in nutrition. And I wanted to find out, this is a culture issue, and Dr. Satcher, if you or the whole panel, if you guys have any thoughts on how we're looking at better ways to market to kids in this very at-risk age. Specifically, athletes are role models, as we all know, starting at a young age. If you have such a prime athlete at a young age who is so embedded in our culture of eating foods that we know are not healthy for us, someone who could benefit themselves performance-wise and recovery-wise. How do we do a better job of marketing to these types of people to try and be good role models for better nutrition overall?
Start eating a lot of kale, you think, Dr. Satcher? Is that,
Well, you know, we were at a school last week, Dr. Fitzgerald and the council, the governor's council on childhood obesity, and they had a garden, and they actually made smoothies for us out of collard greens, blueberries, and pineapple, and it was good. Very good. So I just think we have an opportunity to rise to a new level when it comes to helping children to eat right. But also the policies are changing. You look back at 2010 and the Child Nutrition and Hunger Act, and the Department of Agriculture now sends only healthy foods to schools for free meals. In the Fuel Up to Play 60 program, they have what they call grab and go. Very healthy foods, but kids don't have to sit down because some of them are embarrassed to advertise that they're eating free lunches, but they can grab, I don't know if it's a sandwich or a roll or what, but it's healthy. It has vegetables and fruits, and it's tasty. So I think we're getting to the point now where we have to prepare these foods in such a way that they are enjoyable. And I think increasingly we're seeing that happen. But I was very impressed with what we saw at, what was it, the Burgess Peterson School? Yes. Yeah.
well, in the spirit of leaving them wanting more, we're going to have to end that here. It's time. But thank you very much. That was a great discussion. Thank you.